Aaron Little Jr. and Willie Cherry Jr. were both teenagers living in Bogalusa, Louisiana. In February 2021, their actions tore apart a close-knit neighborhood and led to a young man's end. Larmond L.G. Godbold was known in the area. He kept to himself mostly. That night, around 8 p.m., he pulled into a driveway in Washington Parish. The plan was simple: a quick sale. Nothing more. After completing the exchange, he sat in his car. His girlfriend was in the passenger seat. Then, out of the dark, 3 hooded figures appeared. No warning, no words, just weapons raised. Aaron, Willie, and a third teen demanded LG's money and product. One held a weapon to his head. The girlfriend saw her chance and slammed on the gas. The car lurched. A single shot rang out. LG was hit in the chest. The vehicle rolled forward as he slumped in the seat. His girlfriend screamed for help. Neighbors ran outside, but it was already too late. Investigators quickly began piecing together what happened. They learned that the 3 had intended to take whatever they could by force. The plan was not to warn or scare, but to overpower. When LG resisted, they used their weapons. That decision turned the theft into a fatal shooting. At the time, Aaron J.R. Little was 19 years old. Willie Wooski Cherry was just 17. Both had spent time in Illinois before moving back to Louisiana. Police scanned nearby surveillance. One frame from a gas station in Slidell showed them trying to leave town. A few hours later, officers made the arrest. They found 2 firearms in Aaron's car. Ballistics later showed one matched the fatal shot. The third teen agreed to help authorities. He admitted his role and said he would testify against Aaron and Willie. In exchange, he pleaded guilty to lesser charges and accepted a 40-year sentence with hard labor. In June 2023, a jury in Washington Parish heard the full story. The victim's girlfriend took the stand. She described the moment she saw the barrel. She said she grabbed at the gun, trying to protect LG, but couldn't stop what followed. Defense lawyers questioned her memory, but could not change the core facts. After about 2 hours of discussion, the jury decided both Aaron and Willie were guilty of intentional homicide and theft while armed. On July 11th, 2023, the judge handed down the penalties. Each young man received life behind bars with no chance of early release. They also each got 50 extra years for using a weapon. Under state rules, teens can sometimes be reviewed later for parole. In this case, the judge left that decision open, which means Aaron and Willie could remain in prison indefinitely. Now meet the young man who opened fire on an innocent student. Bryson Duke John Lewis grew up in New Iberia, Louisiana. His exact birth date isn't public, but records show he was 18 during the August 2019 incident. He came from a working-class family in Iberia Parish. His parents kept a low profile, doing their best to raise their kids on tight budgets and limited chances. At school, Bryson mostly stayed quiet, but in time, his name surfaced in whispers, linked to a local street circle. That shift pulled him into trouble fast. He got into fights. Suspensions followed, and soon he was carrying weapons. On August 16, 2019, 17-year-old Garon Lewis sat alone in his parked car. He was a senior at New Iberia High. He planned to pick up his girlfriend for an evening date. Instead, Bryson and at least one other person pulled up. They opened fire. Garon lost his life behind the wheel. Prosecutors say Bryson grabbed a handgun and joined the ambush. They say he acted on gang-based rumors. He and his friends believed Garon belonged to a rival group. He did not, but they never checked. That mistake cost an innocent young man his future. Why target Garon? Why not confirm who he was first? Their failure to verify his identity sealed his fate. One quick decision changed 2 families forever. Bryson's trial began in late 2023. He faced 3 charges: second-degree homicide, conspiracy to commit a second-degree act, and illegal weapon possession. Over 5 days, the district attorney's office laid out its case. They said Bryson armed himself, plotted the ambush, and fired the shot, all in the name of gang loyalty. On September 30th, 2023, a jury found him responsible on all counts. Sentencing came on January 24th, 2024. On May 1st, 2024, Judge Anthony Thibodeau handed down the final decision. Bryson received a mandatory life sentence with no chance of early release or probation. He also got an extra 30 years for the planning charge and 20 years for carrying the weapon illegally. A $1,000 fine was added. The courtroom was heavy with sorrow. Garon's parents, Raymond and Roxy Lewis, addressed the judge. They spoke of Garon's kind heart and his promise as a young nursing student. Raymond said, "I should have seen him in college studying nursing. Now, I am here because his life was taken." Roxy described him as their miracle baby. whose time ended far too soon. The Lewises urged other families to follow court proceedings closely and make sure justice is never left behind. The judge agreed this case stands as a warning about choices, responsibility, and their lasting effects. Next is a 15-year-old who turned a pool party into a horror scene. Levarius Coleman was 15 and lived in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Public records give little information about his family or school life. Court documents show he lived with his brother, David Williams, who later faced charges in the same case. Coleman's young age makes this event even more tragic. On May 31, 2021, several families gathered at the Fairway View Apartments pool for a Memorial Day celebration. Small children played nearby. Just before 8 p.m., Coleman and his brother slipped past the gate. Officials say Coleman approached two young men sitting by the pool, 16-year-old Dwayne Dunn Jr. and 20-year-old Reginald Thomas Jr. A short struggle followed, then shots were fired. Authorities say Coleman aimed at one of the two men, but more people were hit. Dunn and Thomas both lost their lives at the scene. A 1-year-old child named Jatiri Brown was playing nearby with her family. She was also struck and later passed away at a hospital. At trial, the defense said both Coleman and Thomas brought weapons to the pool. They argued that Thomas fired first, and Coleman reacted in self-defense. Prosecutors rejected that view. They said Coleman and his brother planned an ambush. Evidence included threatening messages like, "I told you I was going to catch you, and don't move." After the shooting, police arrested Coleman and his brother. Their mother later faced charges for helping them flee. In July 2024, prosecutors offered Coleman a deal. Over 30 years on lesser charges. He turned it down. That choice proved critical. On August 23, 2024, the jury found Coleman guilty of 3 counts of taking lives. They reached a verdict in under an hour, showing how clear the evidence was. Each count carried a mandatory life sentence. At sentencing on December 4, 2024, Coleman, then 18, received a life sentence. Louisiana law lets those convicted as minors ask for parole after 25 years. He can request parole around age 43. Prosecutors noted that the law guided this outcome, even if it felt too lenient to some. Family members spoke out after the hearing. Jatiri's grandmother said the sentence might help them heal, but that their pain would never fully go away. Dwayne's mother described her grief as a broken heart, but said she felt relief at the decision. District Attorney Hiller Moore said what hurt him most was Coleman's refusal to admit responsibility, which denied the families any sense of closure. In March 2025, Coleman's brother, David Williams, went on trial and was also found guilty of 3 counts of ending lives. Their mother is expected to face charges soon for helping them avoid capture. The next case involves 3 teens who forced a 73-year-old woman into a speeding car. Brenia Baker was 17 in December 2019. She lived in New Orleans and had a tough childhood. She'd already been in juvenile court. She missed a lot of school. Before any court steps began, she went through a mental fitness hearing. Lenira Theophile was 16 at the time. Her home life was unstable. Her parents struggled to find steady work. She moved between foster homes and relatives. Markel Curtis was also 16. She came from a low-income neighborhood. Local reports mentioned only minor run-ins with authorities before December 3rd. All 3 were under state supervision then. None had family support to guide them. On December 3rd, 2019, they met 17-year-old John Honore. Prosecutors say they agreed on a forceful plan. They spotted 73-year-old Linda Fricky alone in her car on Bienville Street. They walked up to her vehicle. Honore sprayed her with a strong irritant so she would open the door. Baker, Theophile, and Curtis pried the door open. Fricky tried to hang on. They yanked her out anyway. As the car sped off, her arm got caught in the seatbelt. The vehicle dragged her more than 700 feet. She did not survive the injuries. Before that night, the 3 girls had only minor offenses: shoplifting, skipping school, the occasional fight. Nothing like this had happened before. In this case, they helped by pushing, shouting orders, and holding Fricky. Honore did the spraying, but their actions forced her into the car and led to her fatal injuries. At first, they faced charges for second-degree harm resulting in a fatal outcome. Their case drew national headlines. In mid-2023, courts checked if they could stand trial. Brenia Baker was found able to participate. After that, the district lawyer considered moving their cases to adult court. On November 20th, 2023, Baker, Theophile, and Curtis took plea deals. They admitted to planned actions that caused a fatal result. This reduced the original charges. Each received a 20-year term with at least 15 years to serve before any review. Their lawyers spoke about their youth and past struggles. Prosecutors said this was the most forceful vehicle seizure they had ever seen. Judges gave each teen 20 years behind bars. The next teen thought no one was watching, but the cameras never stopped rolling. In November 2017, 17-year-old Joshua Lewis stepped into a moment that would alter his life forever. Joshua Darrell Lewis was born on January 14, 2000, and raised in Webster Parish, Louisiana. He attended North Webster High in Spring Hill, where Jalen Thomas was a fellow student. Lewis was nearly 18 when it happened. Details about his family are limited, though his mother and sister were home when officers later arrived. On November 27, 2017, a school dispute involving two younger teens and a girl pulled Lewis in. He stepped up for his 14-year-old friend, KJ, and clashed with Jalen Thomas after Thomas tried to break it up. That afternoon, Thomas called Lewis, challenging him to settle it later. Around 7 p.m., Thomas left his shift at Sonic. He went to an apartment complex to meet his girlfriend. Security cameras showed him walking and talking as usual. At nearly the same time, Lewis drove past in a white Nissan. A nearby gas station camera caught his car. Later that night, Thomas appeared in the parking lot of Harrison Chapel Baptist Church. Someone there stopped him. Thomas was struck 8 times. 2 bullets hit his arm, 4 hit his back or side, 1 grazed him and 1 hit his thigh. Investigators found 14.45 caliber shell casings. At least 2 different guns were used. The pattern of wounds suggested Thomas was running or already down when he was shot in his lungs, liver, and spleen. Why did Lewis do this? In his interview, he said, Thomas reached for his phone when he returned to the lot. Lewis thought Thomas was calling for backup. He and KJ believed no cameras were rolling, until they learned otherwise. On November 29th, Lewis, his mother, and sister went to the Minden Sheriff's Office around noon. They waited until about 4 p.m. before detectives questioned him. Over the next 1 hour and 41 minutes, Lewis confessed on video. He said he fired the first shot. Then KJ opened fire. Lewis admitted he emptied his weapon to prevent identification. He later gave his gun to a man named Ty. That weapon was never recovered. A grand jury charged Lewis on January 22, 2018, with second-degree homicide. His defense tried to block the confession, arguing his age and lack of a lawyer. Louisiana law treats 17-year-olds as adults for serious offenses, so the challenge failed. The trial began in January 2019 in Webster Parish. Prosecutors showed the confession video and the scene evidence. The jury took less than 30 minutes to find Lewis guilty. On April 8, 2019, the judge gave Lewis a life sentence with hard labor. Because he was a minor at the time, he may be eligible for parole under a U.S. Supreme Court ruling on juvenile sentencing. Up next is no warning, no words, just bullets. Larry J McClinton lived in Pineville, Louisiana. He was about 17 when in April 1991 he walked into a mobile home on Genie Street. There he pulled out a gun and began shooting. 21-year-old Angela Hargans was struck many times. She did not survive. Her mother, 52-year-old Nedra Hargans, was also hit, but she lived through it. McClinton grew up in a local family. Public records say little about his parents or siblings. There is no sign of hardship or danger at home. Before that night, he had no record of wrongdoing. He wasn't known to law enforcement, no school suspensions, no previous trouble, nothing that could have predicted what came next. Angela had just returned home from work that day. Nedra was folding laundry in the other room. The trailer door was unlocked, nothing unusual in their part of town. Then came the shots. No argument, no threats, just sudden fire. Angela fell near the kitchen. Nedra, wounded, crawled to the phone to call for help. She told dispatch the name of the shooter. She had seen his face. That call became critical in what followed. On a calm April evening, McClinton slipped into the Hargans' home. He gave no warning. He fired his gun without any clear reason. The sudden shooting shook the whole town. People in Pineville were left puzzled and scared. No one could explain why he did it. Angela wasn't involved in anything risky. Neither was her family. That made the randomness even harder to accept. Police arrived quickly. Neighbors had heard the noise. Officers followed a tip from someone who'd seen McClinton earlier that day. He was arrested within hours, still in the neighborhood. He didn't resist. He didn't say much. And even later, no clear motive came forward. His trial began in 1992. On August 14th, the court found him guilty of causing the fatal shooting and of seriously wounding Nedra Hargans. Prosecutors called it a meaningless act of aggressiveness. McClinton's lawyers said he was a troubled teenager under unknown pressures, but they could not show proof of illness or outside force. The jury took only a few days to decide. On the same day, the judge gave McClinton a life term. Angela's father spoke in court. He said his daughter had dreams, that she was kind, funny, and loved music. Her life, he said, was ended for nothing. The courtroom sat in silence as the sentence was read. McClinton didn't react. The judge said nothing would bring Angela back, but that the law had to respond with permanence. He entered the state prison system as a juvenile serving life. In 2016, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that people who were minors must have a chance for early review. McClinton applied for release in October 2019. The parole board denied his request. The Hargens family and local officials spoke out against letting him go. They said he had never given a full explanation, never written to the family, never shown real change. One official said, "He vanished from the courtroom that day and we've never seen a sign of remorse since." He remains behind bars in Louisiana with no successful bid for release. The next 15-year-old wanted money, but what he took was far worse. Before we move on to the next case, consider subscribing for more cases like this. Mark St Julianne was born in May 1987 in Lafayette, Louisiana. He lived with his parents and younger siblings in a modest mobile home park. His father worked long hours in construction. His mother held several part-time jobs to keep the family afloat. School was hard for Mark. He often skipped classes and fell behind. Instead of doing homework, he tested boundaries with small thefts and minor vandalism. On May 29, 2002, when he was 15, Mark broke into his neighbor's trailer. That neighbor was 13-year-old Alyssa Case. She lived next door in the same park. Alyssa was a bright student. She made the straight-A honor roll at St. Cecilia Elementary. Her mother let her outside for a walk that afternoon. When Alyssa did not come back on time, her mother went inside and found her seriously hurt. Alyssa's neck was cut and she had blunt force injuries to her head. Investigators later said Mark acted out of desperation and saw an easy chance to steal cash. He thought there would be money inside. Once inside, he panicked. His intent was theft, but he ended up taking Alyssa's life. There was no sign of any other motive. He lost control, and a few dollars led to a tragic outcome. News of the act shook the tight-knit Lafayette community. People could not believe someone so young could do this. Police traced the break-in to Mark after neighbors saw him running away. He had red stains on his clothes. Evidence tied him directly to what happened. He was arrested within days. Because he was under 16, Louisiana law barred the most severe penalty. Instead, he faced a life sentence. Mark pleaded not guilty. His lawyer said he never meant for anyone to die. They argued the theft went wrong. But prosecutors showed items stolen from Alyssa's home, Mark's conflicting statements, and forensic proof placing him at the scene. The trial began in September 2003. The key questions were these. Did Mark plan to take a life, or did he panic during a burglary gone wrong? On the final day, the jury found him guilty of second-degree taking of life. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a requirement under Louisiana law for that offense. Mark was sent to Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angola. He has been there for more than 20 years. In his late 20s, he joined a prison support program. He reconnected with family, including his nephew. He has expressed regret and shown that he understands what he did. Recently, people have asked whether someone who was a juvenile should ever have a chance for review. A public defender argued that life sentences without parole for minors are too harsh and run counter to recent Supreme Court decisions. But Alyssa's mother, still grieving, wrote that she wants Mark to remain locked up for life. That leaves us with a tough question. Should a teenager who caused such harm but later showed remorse ever get another chance? Louisiana law still says no, but shifting Supreme Court standards could one day open a path for review, though nothing has changed yet in Mark's case. The next victim walked home from school. He never made it. Eric Dwayne Green was 16. He lived in Shreveport, Louisiana, and attended Booker T. Washington High School in Caddo Parish. Public records don't say anything about his parents or siblings. We only know he grew up in that community. On May 26, 2022, a Caddo Parish grand jury charged Eric and two other 16-year-olds with second-degree unlawful taking life in the passing of 17-year-old DeAnthony Walker. The reason they chose DeAnthony remains unknown, but the plan was in place that morning. They had stolen a black Kia Soul before school let out. Then they used it to lure DeAnthony away from the campus. On January 27, 2022, DeAnthony was walking home. He was unarmed and had no warning of what was coming. A doorbell camera caught a black Kia Soul pulling up beside him on Harvard Avenue. The driver called his name. Eric climbed out of the back seat and opened fire with a Glock 19. 17 9mm rounds struck DeAnthony. As DeAnthony tried to run, one of the other teens aimed a .357 caliber handgun from inside the car and fired again. Then the third teen got out, struck DeAnthony on the pavement, and fired at point-blank range. Investigators later found 26 9mm shell casings and 3.357 casings at the scene. 2 days after the shooting, Police spotted the stolen Kia and gave chase. The teens scattered. One of them confessed and named Eric as one of the shooters. Officers recovered Eric's phone and saw he had been near the school at dismissal time and close to where the shooting happened. Surveillance footage traced the Kia's movements. At a co-defendant's home, police found a Glock that ballistics matched to the 17 fired rounds. They also found Eric's DNA inside the vehicle. What drove Eric to take another teen's life at 16? There is no record of any personal conflict or warning. Some wonder if peer pressure or a group was involved. The careful theft of the car and the way it unfolded suggest this was planned by more than one person. On March 28, 2025, a jury of 8 women and 4 men reached a unanimous verdict in just 1 hour. They found Eric guilty of second-degree charges. Could a weaker case have changed things? The surveillance video, ballistics results, phone data, and DNA evidence made the prosecution's case very strong. Defense lawyers Casey Simpson and Harry Johnson presented their arguments, but the evidence spoke for itself. On April 14, 2025, Judge John D. Mosley Jr. handed down the mandatory sentence: life in prison with no probation or suspension. Since Eric was under 18 at the time of the offense, Louisiana law allows him to become eligible for parole in the future. Up next are 9 teenagers, 1 elderly woman, and a crime that still haunts Alexandria. Joseph Green was born in the late 1970s in Alexandria, Louisiana. Little is known about his family or early years. Court papers show that as a teenager he joined a local street gang. By age 15, he was spending most of his time with other gang members and getting into serious trouble. On October 24, 1994, 82-year-old Rita Rabelais was found in her home on Kelly Street. She had been badly hurt and had deep cuts to her head and neck. Her body was tucked away in a closet. There were bruises, torn clothing, and broken furniture, signs of a fierce struggle. Investigators found that 9 teens, including Joseph Green, had broken into her house. They left behind red shoe prints, rubber gloves, a cutting tool, a sharpening rod, and a blue towel. Everything pointed to a planned theft. The group thought Rita might have cash, jewelry, or even a weapon hidden in her house. A teen named Ricky Swafford later said he heard them talking about the plan days before. He remembered Green agreeing to go along. On the day it happened, another teen, Jerry Joseph, told police he saw Rita being beaten. He said Green kicked her while others held her down. Later, investigators matched Green's palm prints and gloves, found in Rita's trash, to the scene. What made a 15-year-old take part in something so brutal? Maybe it was loyalty to his friends. Maybe it was the lure of easy money. Or maybe he felt pressure to prove himself. Whatever the reason, the outcome was heartbreaking. Police moved quickly. On December 9, 1994, after 1 teen gave their names to investigators, warrants were issued. Green was arrested soon after. At his 1995 trial, prosecutors used witness statements, physical evidence, and lab tests. Ricky Swafford and Jerry Joseph both spoke about what they heard and saw. Experts confirmed the red stain prints and the cutting tool came from Rita's home. Despite his youth, Green was found guilty of second-degree homicide. The jury agreed he played an active role. He was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of release. Louisiana law required that sentence for a juvenile in such a case. 30 years later, he remains behind bars. In recent years, new laws have allowed teens serving life to ask for a review of their sentences. Joseph Green and some of his friends may get a hearing one day. But after such an act, it is unclear whether those hearings will lead to freedom or whether memories of Rita's suffering will stand in the way. Damen Riley grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He was 15 when his life completely changed. Public records say little about his parents or siblings. His childhood seemed marked by money struggles and a lack of steady adult support. One cold night in December 1994, Riley walked into a small store in Baton Rouge. He had bought a gun for $20, saying he needed it for protection. Inside the store, he aimed the weapon at the shopkeeper. He pulled the trigger once. The shot hit the back of the man's head, and he passed on the spot. Riley ran away with some cash. Police followed him to the nearby Canal Bayou Fountain area. There, they found the gun he had thrown away. Riley then admitted everything. He said he bought the gun, pointed it at the store owner, fired the shot, and took the money. At trial, the evidence was clear. His recorded confession, the recovered gun, and witnesses all matched. The jury voted 11-1 that Riley was guilty of second-degree charges. After that vote, Riley faced the law's mandatory penalty. At that time in Louisiana, someone convicted of second-degree homicide had to spend life in prison with no chance of getting out. Jurors felt uneasy. Their foreperson, Kelly Troth, said Riley seemed to understand what he had done right away. She recalled him saying, "Oh my God, what have I done?" The jurors even asked the judge to show Riley some mercy and offer education and counseling options, but state law did not allow it. In 2012 and again in 2016, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that automatic life terms for people under 18 were unfair. Those decisions applied to cases like Riley's. Louisiana then reviewed all its inmates who had faced the old rule. By January 2018, Riley was back in court. Prosecutors argued he should not be allowed to ask for release early, but the judge disagreed. Riley's new sentence still set life in prison. This time, however, he could one day ask for parole. Today, Riley remains behind bars. He can now apply for release when he meets the rules set by the parole board. The city had shut off the next teenager's tracker. Days later, someone was gone. Malik Cornelius was a teen in New Orleans, Louisiana. He was born around 2007. Almost nothing is publicly known about his early years or family. He grew up in a city marked by deep inequality and overfilled youth courts. By age 15, police had already stopped him for carrying weapons and for illegal substance possession. A judge then ordered him to wear a GPS tracker. The tracker worked through a phone app and an ankle device. But that system soon broke down. The monitoring contract had expired at the end of 2023, so nothing kept him in check. On January 5th, 2024, Malik joined a group of armed teens in the Faubourg Marigny neighborhood. That area is known for its nightlife and tourists. Their plan was to rob visitors. Malik still wore the broken tracker. It should have kept him from wandering too far. Jacob Carter was a 32-year-old baker from Tacoma, Washington. He and his husband flew to New Orleans for New Year's celebrations and to promote their vegan bagel shop. At the corner of Bourbon and Kerlerec streets, Malik's group surrounded the couple. They pretended they only wanted money. In the struggle, Malik drew a gun and fired at Jacob. Later tests linked the gun to Malik. DNA and ballistics tied him to the weapon. The getaway car, a Kia Optima, was found sunk in Bayou St. John. Jacob fell into his husband's arms and did not survive. Prosecutors said Malik meant to carry out an armed theft. His choice to fire the weapon turned the event into a fatal incident. Court papers and defense statements pointed to poverty, peer pressure, and poor supervision. His lawyer said Malik was a teenager protecting friends. Many people were involved, the attorney said. They let one child take all the blame. The prosecution stressed that Malik's role was clear. He fired the gun, helped plan the incident, and tried to cover it up. The big question was why he crossed that line. Was it carelessness, loyalty to peers, or a desperate need to survive? Malik faced charges for causing a fatal shooting and was tried as an adult in Orleans Parish Criminal District Court. The trial laid out the facts. His ankle monitor was off. Surveillance footage tracked the stolen Kia. Phone records put him at the scene. Police officers, weapon experts, and digital forensics teams all presented evidence. The defense insisted he was just a minor used by older teens. They argued the tracking system had failed him. Both sides asked, did the broken monitor let someone lose their life? Originally, Malik faced the most serious charges. But on May 9, 2025, at age 17, he accepted a plea deal on a reduced count of manslaughter. He was given a 26-year prison term. The judge seemed uneasy but approved the agreement. As a result, Malik will stay behind bars well into his 40s, an outcome shaped by both what happened and how young he was at the time. The next victim was dragged for blocks. He never looked back. John Honore was 17 and lived in the New Orleans area. Not much is known about his early years or family. Court papers mention a troubled home life. He spent most of his teen years around mid-city New Orleans. On March 21, 2022, Honore and three others, Laniera Theophile, Brenia Baker, and Markel Curtis, planned to take a car without permission. That afternoon, 73-year-old Linda Fricky was pulling into her driveway in mid-city when they arrived. Honore released pepper spray inside her car. She could not move. He then reached for the keys. The car lurched forward as he tried to drive off. Fricky's arm got caught in the seatbelt. The car dragged her for about 700 yards. It rolled over pavement and curbs. Her arm was severed. She later passed away in the street. Security cameras showed Honore driving the SUV while Fricky remained trapped, still conscious, still trying to escape. Her body was dragged past homes, trees, and onto the concrete. Witnesses screamed. Some tried to run after the vehicle. One woman, horrified, said she thought she was seeing a mannequin until she realized it was a real person. The footage became the centerpiece of the prosecution. It showed there was time to stop, time to get out. But Honore didn't. That was the moment prosecutors said he crossed the line. From theft to something irreversible. What started as an opportunistic theft went far beyond what anyone expected. There was no plan to cause a fatal result. The main factors were desperation and poor judgment. In the hours after the crime, Honore never turned himself in. It wasn't until authorities tracked down the suspects through footage and eyewitness reports that he was arrested. At trial, prosecutors said he never checked if Fricky was okay, never looked back. Afterward, Honore sent a letter to Fricky's family. He said he was sorry for the pain he caused. He did not offer more details or explanations. He was tried as an adult. Prosecutors argued that by choosing to drive off, he accepted the risk to Fricky's life. A jury took about 2 hours to reach a decision. They found him guilty of second-degree homicide. His sentencing hearing was emotional. Linda's family sat in court as Honore stood before them. Her sister said, "We want no mercy." The judge agreed. Honore received life in prison. His 3 friends pleaded guilty to attempted manslaughter in November 2023. Each received a 20-year sentence. They had admitted their roles early to avoid a full trial. In Louisiana, a second-degree homicide conviction carries a life sentence. Since Honore was 17 at the time, the judge allowed him to ask for parole after 25 years. In May 2025, Honore's attorneys asked for that parole eligibility to be shortened. They said the sentence was too harsh for a teen with no record. A 3-judge panel disagreed. They said the original court had weighed his youth fairly and followed the law. The sentence stood. Today, Honore remains behind bars. His parole window won't open until the late 2040s, if at all. Meanwhile, Fricky's family says no sentence can undo what happened that day on North Scott Street. His final sentence stands: life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. In the next case, no one's life was taken that night. So why did he get life in prison? Thayer Green grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. There isn't much public information about his family, like his parents or siblings. But what we do know is that Thayer and his girlfriend, who were both teenagers at the time, had a child together. Their relationship was rocky. They argued often, which was clear from hundreds of text messages sent in the months leading up to the incident. Aside from this, not much else is publicly available about his early life. Most records focus on what happened during the case and the legal issues that followed. Everything changed in the early morning hours of July 10th, 2012. Thayer's ex-girlfriend, referred to in court as KL, was sitting in a car with a friend. They were parked outside her cousin's upstairs apartment at Bent Tree Apartments in North Baton Rouge. Thayer arrived at the complex, visibly angry, and followed KL to the apartment door. What exactly he intended to do isn't fully clear, but from there things spiraled. Thayer forced his way into the apartment. He slammed the door, which knocked KL to the floor. He pulled her by the hair and started hitting her over and over. Then he kicked her and grabbed her by the neck. At one point, he picked up a metal candlestick holder and hit her on the face and head several times. Her cousin, who was asleep at the time, woke up from the noise. She quickly hid and called emergency services. While this was happening, Thayer took the cousin's 11-year-old sister's phone and ran from the apartment. He didn't get far. Officers from Baton Rouge police caught him shortly after. Thayer was charged with several serious offenses. The original charges included breaking into the home, using force to take something, and causing physical harm. During the trial, a jury found him guilty of the first charge. The other 2 were reduced to a lesser type of theft and second-degree battery. Prosecutors also brought up Thayer's past. He had 2 previous convictions from 2011. Both were for stealing, and he had committed them while still a minor. Because of these past actions, Louisiana's habitual offender law applied to him. That law allows for a life sentence with no chance of parole for repeat offenders. At trial, Thayer's defense team pointed to old text messages between him and KL. They said the messages showed she had misled him, which may have triggered his actions. These messages were handed over by the prosecution late in the trial process. The judge gave a short delay, but the trial continued. In the end, the jury found him guilty on all 3 counts. Once convicted, his sentences were given one after the other. He got 10 years of hard labor for the home entry. After that, 4 more years were added for the theft charge. Another 4 years followed for the battery charge. Because of his past record, the court approved a stronger sentence. Thayer was officially considered a third-time offender. Under the habitual offender law, he was given a life sentence with no chance of parole. But that wasn't the end of his legal story. In 2017, Louisiana's Supreme Court looked at cases like his again. They ruled that giving a life sentence without parole to someone who was a minor at the time, and who didn't take someone's life, was not allowed under the U.S. Constitution. They based this on a major decision from the U.S. Supreme Court called Graham v. Florida. That case said life sentences without parole were not fair for minors in non-fatal cases. Because of this ruling, Thayer's sentence had to be changed. His life sentence stayed, but he now had the chance to be considered for parole after serving 25 years. His case was sent back to the trial court. This gave Thayer the chance to show how he had changed with age and maturity. He could now present reasons why his life sentence might be too severe. His convictions stayed the same: home invasion, simple theft, and second-degree battery. Only the no chance of parole part was removed. Thayer is still in prison, but he now has a chance to be reviewed for release starting around the year 2037. His future will depend on the decision of the Louisiana Parole Board at that time. The next teenager broke his ankle monitor. Weeks later, a woman was gone. Kevin Nunees was 15 years old when he caused a fatal shooting in New Orleans. He lived in the city's 9th Ward. He was born around 2009. Public records do not show much about his family. Court papers say he had already faced juvenile court for several serious physical harm offenses. Those included 7 counts of causing serious harm, carrying a concealed firearm, and a domestic incident involving a family member. The judge placed him under home confinement and fitted him with an ankle monitor. That device stopped working after someone deactivated it. Kevin then moved around the city without being tracked. On June 30th, 2024, at about 4:36 a.m., Christy Thibodeau sat in her parked car in the French Quarter. She was a 43-year-old tour guide. Surveillance cameras caught Kevin stepping out of the shadows with a firearm. He fired one shot that struck Christy and ended her life. He left her alone in the driver's seat. Police arrested Kevin soon after. They also took into custody 2 others, 17-year-old Gerben Albarek and 19-year-old Joshua Bonifacio. All 3 were charged with second-degree homicide. Gerben and Joshua also faced conspiracy to commit theft with a weapon. Kevin was identified as the person who pulled the trigger. He was tried separately. Prosecutors believe Kevin and his friends planned a theft with a weapon. They say the plan went wrong when he fired the shot. No one has heard Kevin speak in public about why he did it. People wonder whether he acted out of desperation or anger. The answer is not clear. Kevin first appeared in juvenile court for his earlier offenses. He received a lighter sentence then. After violating his release by cutting off the ankle monitor, authorities issued an arrest warrant on May 21, 2024. He pleaded not guilty to the homicide charge. The judge set his bond at $1 million. On August 22, 2024, a grand jury agreed that Kevin should be tried as an adult. During the trial, prosecutors showed surveillance footage and called witnesses. In closing, they described the silence that fell after the shot rang out in the French Quarter. Kevin did not show any public remorse. The jury found him guilty of second-degree homicide. The judge sentenced him to a life term with no chance of release. He was just 15 when he took Christy's life. As of mid-2025, he remains in prison. The judge said Kevin had been given chances under juvenile law, but had broken society's trust. The next act happened in 1963. But the fight for justice didn't end until 2021. Henry Montgomery grew up in Baton Rouge in the early 1960s. He came from a modest, working-class black family. He had an IQ in the low 70s, and school was a struggle for him. His childhood unfolded amid the high racial tensions of the South. The civil rights movement was active. Leaders like Medgar Evers and Malcolm X were still alive. Cross burnings happened around his neighborhood. 2 weeks after his 17th birthday in 1963, Henry skipped school. Deputies from the East Baton Rouge Sheriff's Office went looking for him. A plainclothes deputy named Charles Hurt approached. Hurt had his hands up and was stepping back. Henry fired a gun. The deputy passed from his wounds. What led a teenager to pull the trigger? Fear, confusion, or panic may have played a part. The encounter escalated within seconds. A young man faced a tense situation and reacted. Henry was tried as an adult. The trial took place during a time of widespread racial tension and unrest. Many local residents held biased views. He was found guilty of ending the deputy's life. He received the harshest sentence available then. In 1966, the Louisiana Supreme Court overturned that verdict. They ruled the trial was unfair and biased. The case went back for a new trial. In 1969, he faced trial again. Once more, he was found guilty. This time, he was given life in prison without any chance of release. He went to the state penitentiary known as Angola. That prison had a tough reputation. He arrived as a teenager among hardened inmates. Conditions there were very hard. Still, he managed to adapt. Inside, he worked in the silkscreen shop. He also coached boxing. Over time, he became a guide and mentor to other inmates. He built a reputation for good behavior. In 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that sentencing children to life without release was cruel under the Eighth Amendment. That decision opened the door to new reviews of old cases. Henry asked for another hearing. In January 2016, the Supreme Court made clear that this rule applied to his case. He became eligible for a new sentence or for parole. In 2017, a judge resentenced him. He kept the life term, but now could seek release. The judge noted Henry's record as a model inmate. He He appeared before the parole board twice. In early 2018 and again in 2019, his request was denied. Officials said he still needed to finish certain programs. Supporters pointed out that he had no access to those programs for most of his sentence. On November 17, 2021, the parole board voted 3-0 to grant his release. They cited his decades of positive conduct. At age 75, he walked out of Angola. Two of Deputy Hurt's daughters met with Henry before his release. They showed him forgiveness. Some family members disagreed with the decision. Still, his case shows that people can change over many years.